Good evening. Welcome to the evening transmission simultaneously in World Funding Channel of All India Radio, medium wave 50.5 meters, corresponding to 666 kHz. Please stand by.
The Court of Justice at The Hague in the Kulbhushan Jadhav case has come as a major relief for India, providing space and direction for Pakistan to reconsider the ill-formed process it pursued in convicting and sentencing to death the former naval officer. In its judgment, the ICJ ruled in favor of India's petition on 6 counts, finding that Pakistan was in breach of its own commitments to the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations and also rejecting its contention that the convention doesn't apply to the charges of espionage and terrorism leveled against Mr. Jadhav. Put plainly, the judgment castigates Pakistan's legal process against Jadhav ab initio from the initial failure to inform India of the arrest, besides the failure to inform him of his rights, to provide him legal representation and to provide him an open and fair trial. Pakistan's leadership may choose to publicly rejoice over the fact that the ICJ didn't annul the trial or direct a release, but the order should give it a pause for thought and allow senior minds within its establishment to order a comprehensive review of the trial process, if not a full retrial. The ICJ has worked with precedents in the cases of Germany versus United States, Legrand, and Mexico versus the United States, Avena, both cases where it had ruled that the US was in violation of the Vienna Convention and ordered a review and consideration of its process. Pakistan must realize that it cannot now emulate the example of the US, which defied the ICJ's ruling, and work instead in good faith to implement the ICJ's detailed recommendations for an effective process of justice for Mr. Jadhav. Indian Express, in its editorial title 50 Years Later, says, "This week marks 50 years of one of the most important economic decisions taken by a government in independent India. The objective then was to force banks, many of which were controlled by business groups, to lend to the farm and other sectors, to small firms, offer services in the hinterland and expand credit, especially in rural areas. The decades since then have a structural transformation evident in the countrywide footprint of banks, channelizing of savings by them to productive investment, support for industry and to the government to finance its planned investments, deliver on its social banking mandate, generate jobs in the services sector, help reduce regional disparities and broadly enhance growth. That was the start of financial inclusion." The Pioneer, in its editorial title 20 Years On, writes, "The news that Pakistani army regulars had infiltrated into India from across the line of control (LOC) did not just take our civilians by shock, it took the political and military establishment by complete surprise as well. It was extremely fortuitous how the information of the infiltration had reached the government and the senior military brass at army headquarters. But once both the military and political leadership became aware of the seriousness of the crisis, they began to take matters up extremely seriously. Yet despite the army's assurances, Kargil was not a short war. Although Pakistan disowned its own troops, they held on to the higher ground fairly determinedly, as we lost many brave young men from across the country trying to recapture snow-capped heights. As far as serious high-altitude warfare goes, Kargil took it to a new level, but reclaimed the heights but did not force the Pakistani possession. What was shocking to the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the fact that he believed that India and Pakistan were close to an agreement. The Delhi-Lahore bus service had recently started and Vajpayee himself had led what he believed was a successful trip across the border. One thing the Indian establishment realized immediately was that the Pakistani army did not like losing control and was fiercely opposed to peace with India. That said, just a few years later, Pakistani military dictator Pervez Musharraf, who had orchestrated the attacks, travelled to Agra to discuss improving ties with India. The talks failed, and despite some attempts, both official and unofficial, our relations with Pakistan are at new lows, particularly after the Balakot airstrikes. The Times of India, in its editorial title, Unto the Breach, "The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code (IBC), which was enacted in May 2016, is a critical link in a chain of steps initiated since 1991 to transition India to a market economy. The first set of reforms lowered entry barriers and thereby expanded sectors such as aviation. The early reforms, however, did not provide for exit options. This led to enormous misallocation of resources and lost opportunities as zombie firms took up scarce resources. IBC is the best possible solution. On Wednesday, the cabinet approved 8 amendments to IBC, aiming to safeguard the code's underlying spirit. A key aim of the code is to induce behavioral change, particularly among promoters. Continued ownership following default of debt